Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited for another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show, and I'm joined by my good friend, Matt Carroll. Matt, good to see you.
Good to see you, Chad.
Very excited to have a supply chain industrial real estate expert on the show. And Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Jim, and then we'll get Jim to add anything in that you might miss. But Matt, turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. It's always great to be on. I think this is our fourth time, something like that. So, yeah, we had a chance to speak together in Seattle on that panel together in NAIOP. So always a pleasure. But so Jim, I'll let you introduce yourself fully because you know your background better than I do. But one of the things that I love about you is that you become a mentor in this industry for me. And we've had the chance to connect over many things, one of them being Purdue and our love for Purdue. You've got the Purdue training in your background. But yeah, you are a supply chain. I tell people you're a supply chain guru and someone who is not only well connected, but a wealth of knowledge in the industry. And you actually just spoke in the Dominican Republic because you believe in where that is going as the future, possibly for supply chain and logistics, at least for this part of the world. And you do work in Asia, India, Latin America. We were actually on a call the other day with some people in Guatemala about starting some partnerships over there. And so I want to have you kind of introduce yourself, tell us about your background, about the things you've accomplished. I mean, you've written many books as well. So tell us a little bit more about you, Jim, and your background.
Well, thank you, Matt, and great to be with you, Chad. And my name's Jim Tompkins. I began with a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD from Purdue. Never considered leaving Purdue because back then there was something called the Selective Service, and they kept drafting me. I got drafted a total of 14 times. They really thought I'd make a good soldier, and so they were persistent. And in fact, the 14th time they drafted me was in November of 1971. And I needed until January of 72 to finish my PhD. So I went to the draft board and said, hey, I will join the Army, but I can't go until January. And they said, well, you're going to come now for 2 years, or you're going to come in February for 3 years. I said, I'll come in February for 3 years. So I signed up, entered the Army as Dr. Private Tompkins. And interesting enough, since I enlisted, the duty was not where everyone got drafted. Everyone got drafted, got sent to Vietnam. I got sent to New Jersey, which was considerably more safe than Vietnam, and a pretty good tour of duty. I actually was able to use my education and worked for the U.S. Army. No one knew I was in the Army. Several people knew me as Dr. Tompkins, and I did work around facility engineering, keeping forts maintained and designing warehouses for the U.S. Army. So it was a great experience. After 3 years, my wife and I left that, and I came to North Carolina, and was a professor at NC State, teaching facilities planning, material handling, industrial logistics, and transportation, and realized we were poor. You know, all our friends had graduated and went out and got jobs and made money and bought houses. And my wife and I had a completed master's, a PhD, an Army commitment, and now we were starting out kind of 8 years behind. So I went to my boss and said, what can I do to make some extra income? He said, why don't you teach some seminars? And I said, well, that's a great idea. And so what I did is I took my industrial engineering background and took my Army experience in warehousing and created a course called Planning and Managing Warehouse Operations. And I'm quite confident that it was the best warehousing 2-day seminar in the world. The reason I'm quite confident of that is it was the only 2-day warehousing seminar in the world. No one else was thinking that. And people, 1975 said, warehousing seminar? What are you going to talk about for 2 days? And well, I taught it, and it went over, and people liked it. And so NC State said, we'll do that twice a year. And I said, I want to do that more than twice. What's your market? And they said, well, about a 3-hour drive. So I went to Virginia Tech and taught it there. I went to Old Dominion, which was east, and taught it there. Went to University of South Carolina, which is 5 hours south. Went to University of Tennessee, which was 5 hours west. And I now started teaching warehousing seminars. And then an organization in New York called me and said, hey, we'd like you to do this all over the country. So I started doing all over the country. Then we added Canada, and we added Mexico, we added Japan, we added Europe. And I'm teaching these 2-day seminars every day I have a chance. And what I figured out is for every 20 people I had attending the seminar, I got 2 opportunities to do consulting. And so I thought, wow, that's cool. But I have a full-time job as a professor. I got about a half-time job teaching these seminars. When am I going to do the consulting? So I hired a graduate student, and then I hired another graduate student, and then I hired another graduate student, and then I hired another graduate student. And in 1979, my wife sat me down. She says, Jim, your part-time income is 6 times larger than your full-time income. I said, wow, I hadn't paid attention to that. And so we then took the decision to leave the university, and I would make my life's work as a consultant. So we started doing warehouse consulting, and then transportation, and then inventory, and then network design. We started doing network design. That got us involved a little bit with real estate and talking about how we can get subsidies and how we can leverage different real estate with different transportation costs and labor rates, and doing that whole thing. Then in the 80s, we added the whole technology thing. We did warehouse management system, transportation management, order management system. We did the whole thing there. In the late 90s, we started to do material handling integration. We sold a piece of the firm to private equity so that we could expand globally, and we took the whole hemisphere. We did Canada, Mexico, Central America, and South America, as well as the U.S., and the business was growing. We were doing very well. In 2007, that private equity firm said, well, we've made our money. We want to flip it. And so they took their 35% they own, and they sold it to Blackstone. And so I had the opportunity to be a member of Blackstone from 2007 through 2015, where Blackstone said, time for us to leave. We made our money. And so they sold it to a Chinese firm, which owned 35% from 2015 to 2020. Company grew, prospered. We were several $100 million, and we were profitable, and business was good. Matt mentions books. I wrote 31 books along the way. I write a book when I go through some real learning experience, and I learn a bunch. And usually I learn a bunch because I make a lot of mistakes. So doing these different things, I was making mistakes, and so I was learning. So I'd write a book about it. And so wound up writing 31 books. Interestingly, between 1975 and 2012, I wrote 30 books. Between 2012 to 2022, I wrote 0 books. 2023, I wrote book 31. And so I'll explain that in a minute, how that gap occurred. But we were doing great. Christmas 2019, I was the happiest guy in the world. Everything was just marvelous. Kids, grandkids, wife. I mean, just life is marvelous, and it was great. And then March 14th, 2020, that one day we lost $32 million worth of book business. And we said, oh, wow. It was only 4 projects. It was one large project at $22 million in the US, one large project in Australia, which was $9 million, and then 2 small projects for a total of $32 million. And we said, oh, wow, what's going to happen when the phone rings the next time? And what do we do? I mean, we've got 400 people. I mean, what do we do with the payroll? How do we make this work? And we said, oh, this is terrible. And so we decided we need to have a reduction in force. And we went through the list as to who we had to cut. And I said, I'm not going to do this. I'm a grower. I'm not a cutter. In fact, I don't know how to write a severance package. I don't know how to fire people. I don't know what to say what's left. And so I decided to leave my own company. And so still to this day, I own 22% of Tompkins International, but I'm not involved with it. I have nothing to do with it. It's got my name on it, and they use my brand, but I don't really work there. It's the company I worked at for 45 years, but I don't work there anymore. And I was retired. And so, April of 2020, I'm retired and trying to watch what's going on with this COVID thing. And the phone rang, and someone asked me for some help. And they wanted me to help them build a warehouse we had designed 4 years earlier. And I said to the guy, I don't build buildings. I design buildings, but I don't build them. I don't know how to build a building. And the guy, he says, yes, but Jim, you know how, you know a lot of people. And I said, well, yeah, I do. He said, you know someone who can help us with this building? I said, well, I work with Sanson, and Nick Sanson has got a pretty good business. So, yeah, I can see if Nick would be interested. And so I introduced Nick to the folks, and the deal took place and made some money. And then another deal came up that was more of an entrepreneurial thing, and a guy needed to borrow 50 million. A guy called me up. He said, "Jim, I need $50 million worth of capital." I said, "Well, I didn't sell my 22% of the company. I don't have $50 million of capital." He said, "No, but Jim, weren't you owned by Blackstone?" I said, "Well, yeah, we were 35% owned for 8 years." He said, "Well, you still know those people?" I said, "Well, of course. My goodness sakes, you go to New York once a month for 8 years. Yeah, you know those people. I still know those people. They're good people, great people." He said, "Well, could you run this by him?" And so we ran it by him, and we did a deal, and I got another paycheck. And so I was just helping people and making money, and so did that a couple times. And a friend called me up, and he says, "Jim," he said, "I just got laid off because of COVID. I got a nice package. I'm out for 6 months, but and I can't really do what I want, which is third-party logistics, for 6 months. So I thought I'd do consulting for you." I said, "Well, Mike, I don't do consulting anymore." He said, "What?" I said, I don't do consulting anymore." He said, "Jim, the way I heard this story is when Adam and Eve were in the garden and they wanted some apples, you were the guy that arranged the apples to get delivered." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I'm old, but I'm not that old, okay? I mean, Matt calls me a guru. What's a guru? It's an old guy that's still working. But so I'm not that old. I wasn't with Adam and Eve. I didn't bring them the apples. I didn't do it." And he said, "You're not doing consulting?" He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm helping people. People call me up and ask for help, and I play matchmaker." He said, "Oh, that's cool." He said, "How about if I help you?" He said, "What do you call this business?" I said, "What do I call this?" I call this business answer the phone. The phone rings, I pick it up, I say hello. And then people ask me to help, and I do. And sometimes they send me a check. Well, sometimes they send me a case of wine. Whatever. Send me some cheese. I don't care. I mean, chocolate is good too. I mean, whatever I can do to help. And so Mike came on board, and he started working with me, and we started doing more deals. And if you look at our business today we have 157 business partners around the world. These are past chief supply chain officers. These are past heads of real estate. These are VPs of transportation, vice presidents of distribution. There's 157 of them in 44 countries around the world, and they're business partners of Tompkins Ventures. And what we do is we find people that have a problem, and then we say, who can help us solve the problem? And we have commercial partners, people that build buildings, people that are in the real estate business, people that are in the technology business, transportation providers, 3PLs, people that sell material handling equipment, people that sell technology. So we have these types of commercial partners. We connect the commercial partner to the guy with the problem. They solve the problem. They get paid. We get a success fee based upon how much money they make, and we get a small marketing and sales success fee. I split that with the business partner. We have capital partners. We have over 580,000 private equity, angel investors, and venture capitals in our database. We are a licensed broker dealer, so we can do deals. And we do deals around the world. We bring companies to the United States. We move companies to Europe. We move companies to South America. So it's very cool. And then we still do some consulting business where our partners bring us an opportunity that they need consulting. We match a consulting partner with a client that has a problem, and we put them together. So we're not doing the hard work. We're not doing the data collection, the analysis, and the writing the reports, but we're doing the innovative work. How can we help these people? What can we do to help them? And so that's what we do, and that's Tompkins Ventures, and it's an exciting business. It's growing like crazy. Matt mentioned I was just in the Dominican Republic. It's the first time in my life that the president of the country gave the welcoming to the conference. I then gave the keynote, and then a day later, the vice president of the country closed the conference. In Dominican Republic, this was the first logistics summit. We had 250 chairs in the room, and we were standing room only. If this event had been in the U.S., they would have shut it down because the fire hazard. You couldn't even walk through the place. I mean, it was so crowded, and talk about the excitement, because what we're doing is we're trying to turn the economy of the Dominican Republic. We're trying to turn that economy away from agriculture, mining, and tourism, and we're trying to make the Dominican Republic the logistics hub of the Western Hemisphere. We want to make the Dominican Republic what the Singapore is to the Eastern Hemisphere. We want to make the Dominican Republic that, because they got the right location. They got the availability of land. I mean, you guys know better than I. Trying to buy land on the East Coast is really difficult. Gulf Coast, not much better. West Coast, terrible. You can't buy land for distribution and fulfillment. It's not available. It's very difficult to find. If you find it, it costs too much. If you do find the land, then where are you going to get the labor? And then what we need to do is we need the leadership to really enable this with the free trade zones and the ability to do things minus tariffs. And then what we need is a lighthouse so we can see the entire end-to-end supply chain. And so we're working with the 5 L's: location, land, labor, leadership, and lighthouse, to allow us to make the Dominican Republic the Singapore of the Western Hemisphere. That's cool. A chance to transform a whole country. I mean, right now, Singapore and Dominican Republic, if you compare them, Dominican Republic is 67 times larger. It's got 8 times the shoreline. It's got 1.7 times the number of people. But the gross domestic product per person in Singapore today is 4.6 times larger than it is in Dominican Republic. Why? Because Dominican Republic has mostly low-paying jobs. Singapore has mostly high-paying logistics jobs. So we're going to upgrade that economy, and we're going to be nearshoring for the United States, for Central America and South America. We're going to be able to do e-commerce from there. It's only 800 miles from Dominican Republic to Florida. Dominican Republic is closer to the East Coast and the Gulf Coast than Mexico is. Mexico's closer to 23% of the Americans. Dominican Republic is closer to 77%. So Tompkins Ventures is taking on the project of transforming a country's economy. So what's not cool about that? And I mean, supply chain is just really, 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 really fun. And so I said I would come back to the topic of why I didn't write a book from 2012 to 2023, because between 2012 and 2020, I didn't make any mistakes. I've been doing the same thing for almost 40 years, and so I just kept doing the same thing. And guess what? I had a job. First time in my life I had a job. But then after COVID hit from 2020 to 2022, I didn't write a book because I didn't know what to say. I was confused. I was totally lost. I had what the heck's going on? But by 2022, I figured out that's the point. The new normal is disruption. And if the new normal is disruption, what we need to do is we need to learn to deal with disruption and understand that VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are here to stay. And how do we respond to that? How do we deal in real estate? How do we deal in facilities? How do we deal in the contracts we sign so that we have optionality, so that we know what we're going to do? Matt was a great basketball player at Purdue. My son was a pretty good basketball player. When my son was 6 years old, he said to me, "Dad, I want to quit football." I said, "Jimmy, you're not a quitter. Why would you quit football?" He says, "Because the coach tells me to do the same thing on every play." My son played offensive line and defensive line. On every play, he was told, knock the guy down in front of you. My son says, "What if it's a pass play?" He said, "Knock the guy down in front of you." "What if it's a running play?" "Knock the guy down in front of you." "What if it's an offense?" "Knock the guy down." My son said, "That's not fun." But when he played basketball, he was point guard. And his coach there, so when you're coming up the floor, look at what's going on. What's the defense doing? If they do this, then you do this. If they do this, then you do this. And that's what we need to have in business today. We need to have optionality. We need to know what the options are. So when this happens, we can do this. When this happens, we can do this. And now we're going to have a supply chain which is resilient, which is going to allow us to really maximize our profitable growth. And so that's what I do. And maybe that was too long, and I'm sorry, but Chad can always cut what he wants, and so that's what Matt asked me to do, and that's what I did.
That was such a great breakdown, and I didn't realize you had written 31 books. So I want to start there on the most recent one. So big gap between 30 and 31. What was the last book about?
So this is the book. It's Insightful Leadership, and you'll notice there's two of me. There's one guy named Jim Tompkins, and there's another guy called James A. Tompkins, PhD. So when it's a book about supply chain, that's Dr. Tompkins. When it's a book about leadership, it's Jim Tompkins. Jim doesn't have a PhD in anything. He just went out there and made a bunch of stupid mistakes and learned from it. Dr. Tompkins is a supply chain expert. And so I, from an integrity point of view, I hate when you go to a school board and Dr. Jones, MD, stands up and say, I'm Dr. Jones. No. This isn't a hospital. This is a school board. You're John Jones. Hi, John. How are you? Don't give me this doctor stuff. And so when it's supply chain, I'm doctor. When it's leadership, it's something I learned from screwing up. So what I learned from screwing up, the subtitle is Surfing the Waves to Organizational Excellence. Surfing the waves to organizational. What does that mean? What it means is if I'm trying to drive a business, it's like being on a surfboard and trying to get a good ride. You guys are on the shore. So if I'm going to do a good job, I'm not looking at you. I'm looking over my shoulder at what's happening. Oh, you see that second wave? No, that's not right. See, oh, look at that third wave. See the third wave, how it's breaking? It's coming back. That third wave, I'm going to ride that third wave. So when the wave comes, I got to paddle, get in front of it, and then the power of that wave I'm in front of, and woof, I'm going to go from 200 feet out to the shoreline in about 10 seconds. What a ride, okay? Even my hair, there's not much, even my hair's blowing, for crying out loud. So isn't that cool? Because what I did is I got in front of the wave breaking. And so what insightful leadership is about is having the insight to ride the waves to create profitable growth. And that's what the book's about. How do you do that? And that's what the book's about. So that's what I learned in 2022 and 2023 that allowed me to hopefully help people in business understand how they can work together to make good things happen. So that's what the last book was about.
I love the dichotomy between James and Jim, the doctor and the guy talking to the layman like us. I love it. I think that's so fascinating. Even circling back to your on the supply chain side and your experience being in the Army, logistics is an Army term, isn't it? Like that, the whole thing was how they developed systems to deal with getting things where they needed to be and people where they needed to be. I want to go back to that. So you were involved in even designing warehouses back in the day, and this was well before industrial real estate was common words. People didn't, outside of the very specific industry, people didn't know about warehousing or industrial real estate. Like it was in the back corner. Nobody was paying attention to it. What was it like at that time, and how were you designing these warehouses, and what went into that whole process?
Well, so the interesting thing is it was all trial and error. There was no body of knowledge called warehousing. When I first started teaching the planning and managing warehouse operations course, guys would come to the course and not have any teeth and wear overalls. They literally did not know how to eat lunch. And so warehousing was not a profession. Warehousing was a job they got when they left high school. They started driving a fork truck. 20 years later, the boss made him a warehouse manager, and there was no science to the warehouse. And so what I did is I took the science of doing things efficiently and effectively from industrial engineering, and I applied it. And so it was really, really basic R&D, trying to figure out how to do this better and how to make things work. But if you look at being in the back corner, tell you a story. In 1979, Tompkins International, the original consulting firm, landed the largest project of our life. It was in Endicott, New York, and it was $170,000, which was close to $1 million in my mind back in 1978. And so I packed up the whole company, all four of us. All four of us drove in a car up to Endicott, New York from Raleigh, North Carolina. And we got in on Sunday night. We got in a hotel, and we bright and shiny, put our suits on, showed up first day of work. We were supposed to be there at 8, so at 7:45, we're standing at the front door. Of course, the front door is locked, so we couldn't get in. So we got in, and the lady had our badges, and she assigned us to a conference room. Went to the conference room. We were getting set up and talked about who we were going to meet with. And this big guy shows up the door of the conference room. He said, "Are you the Tompkins people?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, You're working on that warehouse project?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Warehouse people don't park in the front of the building." You know what I said? "Yes, sir. Where should I park?" He said, "Your car's in the back of the building." So I jumped up, went out, got in the car, drove around to the back of the building, parked in the back of the building, came back in, and went to work. That's what warehousing was in 1978. Now, move the clock forward to 2020, and I'm sitting in the same chair right here. And my wife, at that point, we were married, 52 years? My wife for 52 years comes in and sits down in my office. My wife never comes in and sits. She'll come in the morning, give me a kiss. She'll come in at lunchtime, bring me something to eat, whatever. She'll stop in and say hi. She never comes in and sits down. She came in and sat down. And I said, "Oh, wow, what did let me see. It's not Wednesday, so I wasn't supposed to take the trash down. And I already broke down all the Amazon boxes. And did I leave the refrigerator door open again last night? I tend to leave the refrigerator door, and she yells at me. And I thought, oh my goodness, I left the door open. And then she smiles. And I think, oh, okay, it's going to be okay. She's smiling. And she says, "Congratulations." I said, well, thank you. Why are you saying congratulations? She says, "Well, Ruth just called me." Ruth's one of my wife's best friends. She said, "Ruth just called me. And when she called, she said to me, she says, 'Sherry, I think you said Jim does supply chain. Isn't that what you said?'" And Sherry's known Ruth for, I don't know, 20 years or something. She said, "Didn't you say Jim does supply chain?" And Sherry said, "Yeah." Ruth said, "Well, I was just watching TV, and this is in April of 2020. They're talking about supply chain on TV. Is that what Jim does?" And my wife says, "Yeah." She said, "Oh my goodness." She said, "Is it Jim's fault we can't buy toilet paper?" I mean, was he did that? And so what we did is we went from the guys that had to park behind the building to all of a sudden the guys that couldn't let you buy toilet paper. And so our profession, I kind of feel like, one of those piano man, you sing in this little dingy bar for 40 years, and then all of a sudden in 2 weeks' time, now you're singing in Madison Square Garden, a kind of a Billy Joel type of song there, and so, that's the profession has just exploded, and all of a sudden we're respected, and we're invited to give speeches. Presidents of countries actually want to talk about supply chains, and we're invited to boardrooms. We're welcome in boardrooms. The boardroom, which is basically a bunch of sales guy and a bunch of finance guy, all of a sudden say, "Well, let's bring these supply chain guys in." Now we're included, but are we accepted is another question. So we still have some more work to do. But we have gone from being an illegitimate a bunch of dodos into the guys that are really kind of stirring the drink. And so we're it's kind of cool. Yeah, it's great to be doing what I'm doing today. It wasn't so great, 10, 20, 30 years ago, but now it's a great profession.
Well, Jim, when you and I were talking a while back, that's exactly what you mentioned to me is, how no one used to know what logistics and supply chain was. And then the pandemic happened and everyone was interested all of a sudden. Now people start to understand in a very real way, hey, there's not groceries at the grocery store. The shelves are empty at Target, whatever the case might be. Hey, on TV, I'm seeing 100 ships parked outside of the port, and this is why I can't get my product. All of a sudden, they could attach a real world scenario to what logistics and supply chain was. And so, so I was the same way. people used to kind of look at me cross-eyed when I bring up the fact that I was in supply chain, and now it all makes sense to people, So it's kind of funny. But when you and I talked, it's probably been about 6 months ago. I was preparing to go to NAIOP with Chad, and we were talking about kind of the state of supply chain and industrial real estate at that time. And so that's what Chad and I did. We went over to NAIOP in Seattle and spoke about basically how supply chain informs and affects industrial real estate. But one of the things that you brought up to me, you had written an article that's called "The World is Flat Except When It Isn't," right? And a lot of what you talked about in that was this idea that you brought up earlier about optionality versus optimality. And in fact, when Chad and I were there, one of the heads of Amazon spoke, and he talked a lot about that very topic. And I'm just curious. So you've seen, here we are, this post-pandemic era, and you were down there in the Dominican Republic looking for that next spot, like the Singapore of this side of the hemisphere. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts about kind of that whole optimality versus optionality, where you see that going, and how the last 6 months have evolved as you think about the future.
Yeah. So what we did for probably about 10 years, starting sometime around 2010, all the way 2000 through 2020, is we were looking at making sure we had the lowest cost supply chain. And so what we were doing is we made China the factory of the world. And then what we wanted to do was do just-in-time inventory, so we didn't have excessive inventory and excessive large warehouses. And so what we were trying to do is minimize cost, minimize cost, minimize cost. Well, what we discovered along the way is that if you really minimize cost, you're probably also going to minimize customer satisfaction, and that's going to suffer, and that's going to affect the top line. So maybe you can minimize the bottom line, minimize the cost, but you really can't have a positive impact on the top line unless you have good customer service. And so we started thinking about doing it both to reduce the cost, but also to increase the top line, and looking more at profitable growth as opposed to just minimizing cost. And when that took place, there was a kind of a new day, and people asked the question, well, is China really the cheapest place to buy or not? And there was this concern that there might be other places in the world, maybe Africa, maybe India, where we could get a better price. And so there was some thinking about, let's think about reshoring to the U.S. or nearshoring to the U.S., or at least doing what we called China Plus One. And so China Plus One said, let's leave 50% of our production in China, but let's take the other 50% and take it someplace else. Well, then what's happened over the last 3 years is a movement that ups China Plus One. And what we now have companies saying it's ABC, anywhere but China. And so they want to remove their production capacity from China. And then we remove the production capacity from China. The question is, where should it go? Should it go to India? Should it go to Poland? Should it go to South America? Should it go to Mexico? And as we look at those decisions, we start looking at the trade-off between the cost of production, the cost of transportation, and the cost of inventory. As we look at those trade-offs and those costs, we find out that the cost of inventory isn't what it used to be, because what it used to be is we pretty well knew what demand was, and we pretty well knew what supply was. So synchronizing supply and demand was straightforward. But now, where the new normal is disruption, where the constant surprises and shifts in supply and demand, today, we don't know what our supply is, we don't know what our demand is, and we don't know what our lead times is. So how do you synchronize supply and demand? And the answer to that is by making lead time shorter. And so what we're finding in this hemisphere is people are saying, maybe we can't afford to bring it back to the U.S., but let's get it closer. Let's bring it to South America. Let's bring it to Central America. Let's take it to Mexico. Let's take it to Dominican Republic. And therefore, we're going to take those 3-4 weeks out of the transportation time, and so we're more able to respond. but let's also bring in some new digital tools. Let's use artificial intelligence. Let's use machine learning, and let's create an autonomous supply chain that the autonomy allows us to make decisions about synchronizing supply and demand on a real-time basis within the computer and really have an end-to-end understanding of what's going on in supply chain, all the way from the raw material all the way to the finished product. And we have a full understanding, full visibility, full insightfulness into that supply chain. And now we have actionability by adding AI and ML. Now we're talking about being able to manage that supply chain when we can start reducing inventories again. We can reduce lead times, and we can now synchronize supply and demand, even though supply and demand are variable. That's now getting us someplace where we really can make a difference. And in fact, chapter 9 in this book is on that very topic of digital supply networks and how we go from a supply chain to a digital network. And that's really a critical point. And so it's an important portion of where we're going. And it changes the real estate decisions, it changes the procurement decisions, it changes sourcing decisions, it changes transportation, and it's a whole new ballgame. So in the world is flat except when it isn't, what that paper talks about is the need to reinvent supply chains because it's 2024 and it ain't your grandfather's supply chain anymore.
Even going back.
And Jim,
sorry, Matt, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead, Chad.
I wanted to get your perspective, Jim, on how warehouses have evolved in that time as well, because going back to the 70s when there was no body of knowledge, the warehouses were pretty simple. Product came in, got stored on shelves, forklift probably picked it, but that was it. Very simple mechanics, not a whole lot. Fast forward to today, and there's a lot more value add in the warehouse, a lot more technology coming. I think we're on that cusp of warehouses changing considerably, at least at a faster pace than that slow evolution to where we got to today. What do you think the future of warehouses look like once we start incorporating more advanced technology and racking systems and AI and machine learning? What do you think the future of a warehouse is going to look like?
Well, it's real clear that robots are happening. We can have literally humanoids that are replacing humans with a robot that looks like a human. We can have all sorts of AMRs that are taking the transport out. If you look at a traditional warehouse, there's handling pallets by a fork truck, and then everything else is handled by hand, and it's people walking. We call the highest labor component in a warehouse our order pickers. But the fact of the matter is, if you watch them, they're not picking. What they're doing is walking. So we really should call them order walkers, because what they're doing is walking around the building, carrying portions of an order. And so we went to zone picking, we went to batch picking, we went to a variety of different computer-assisted type picking environments. But those requirements are different because the order profile at the end of the month might be different than they are at the beginning of the month. They might be different when there's a sale versus when there's not a sale. And so you can't have a optimal solution when you have variable requirements. If you look at the difference between a retailer's warehouse, if you got a retailer that's real heavy in e-commerce, boy, after Thanksgiving to about the 15th of December, they're going wild. If you're going to a retailer that's not on e-commerce, but a retailer that's selling through the store, that backs up about a month earlier. But then I'm not picking a shirt and a pair of socks. I'm picking a case of shirts and a case of socks. So the difference between an October warehouse and a November warehouse are major. Now, if I'm not selling directly to the consumer, either online or in store, but instead I'm a wholesaler, guess what? That backs up to September because now I have to be shipping the product that goes to the warehouse that then becomes e-com or direct to store. And so there's the warehouses have a different personality. I mean, I can almost walk in a warehouse and you show me a video of a warehouse by watching what's happening. I can tell you what month of the year it is by looking at the type of product and when does that happen. And so, you know, the warehouse is not consistent what you do day by day, week by week, month by month. It's all over the place. So what we need to have is warehouses which have tremendous optionality, flexibility, adaptability. And that's not what we saw in the 80s. In the 80s, we went from the standard rack and fork truck, we went to a bunch of conveyors. And now we'll go in a warehouse and we'll see 100 miles of conveyor. Guess what? Conveyors are not flexible. They're not adaptable. They are rigid. And so what we're now doing is replacing those with autonomous vehicles. We're replacing those with a variety of bringing product to the order picker as opposed to taking the order picker to the product. So the product to man is an extremely important portion of the overall warehouse environment. Doing that with a batch pick and then a sort, man, you can get some really high productivity. We can talk about 1,000 picks per hour in the right environment if it's designed correctly. So it's about how to use space and how to use labor while maximizing the accuracy of the order, and that takes some real engineering, and some engineering that has the moldability so that we can be great in January and great in March and great in June and great in October and great in November, because those are all different types of circumstances. And so we really need to engineer the excellence into the building. We'll also find the buildings going taller. Why? Because the land costs more and the building cost is in line. So we're better off. The taller the building, the better off we are. If we can't go high for some reason, we're going with mezzanines. Some of us are now, Japan example, and now coming to the U.S., doing multi-floor warehouses. The old requirement for multi-floor warehouses, what do you do if you have a multi-story building and you want to build a warehouse? Well, the first thing you do is tear down the multi-story building. Well, that's not how it works anymore. We can use multi-story warehouses. We need the floor loading, but there's some really interesting opportunities. So the physical space is drastically different than it had been. Greater floor loading, more level floors, some cases super flat floors. We need air conditioning because we don't want warehouse workers working in 96-degree heat. That's not productive. That's not a job people want. So that results in turnover. We need to look at making the environment safe and a place where people feel good about working and feel good about themselves. And they're not just those guys back there, but those are the people that are some of the most important people. If I want to mess up a company, if I really want to mess up a company, you know what job I'd take? Shipping supervisor. Because anything I can break or push off the dock, I can misship. And I'm going to mess up every customer you got. And so you got to respect your shipping supervisor because he's the one that's building your reputation out there. It's really important because you get your order from your online order and you expect to get this blue sweater, and I pull it out of the box and it's size small. What am I going to do with a small sweater? I mean, I don't fit in a small sweater. So give me a break. Who was the idiot who picked this? But it ain't for me. I ain't going to wear it. So now I got to send it back, and they're going to have to pay for the return and all. And oh my goodness, what a hassle! So yeah, it's a whole different world. It ain't your grandfather's warehouse.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And Matt, I know you have a question, but I just had a follow-up question for that, Jim. We've heard rumblings of these dark warehouses, essentially a warehouse with no lights on it. It's all automation, perhaps a little bit of light needs to come on when there's routine maintenance or an issue, but otherwise they're literally dark warehouses. But that hasn't become common yet. That's still one-off scenarios. There's not a lot of them in the grand picture. Most of them are still manned. Lights are still on. Do you see there being a trend to more dark warehouses? And then does that also result in less warehouse workers down the road?
Yes, there'll be more dark warehouses, but in fact, instead of the whole building being dark, what we're going to find is where the storage rack is and the automation is going to be dark. But then when you get out front and you need these things are amazing tools to do order picking and so forth. Can you duplicate these with robots? Yeah, but it's more cost effective to use the dexterity of the people. So what we're going to do is totally eliminate all the walking, and that part of the warehouse is going to be dark. But then when the people are actually doing the picking, the packing, the putting in the boxes and the shipping, then we'll have some lights on. So yeah, lights out is going to be there. We need to have Internet of Things on all the equipment so we really see everything that's happening, even though it's in the dark. And so we know when that fork truck is breaking down. We know when that AMR needs recharging. And so we have an awareness of what's going on. So we can't maybe see physically because it's dark in there, but we can pretty well see electronically and digitally what's happening. So and less workers, absolutely. Uh, Hiring warehouse workers is a very difficult job. A lot of people don't want to work in warehouses, and so when we do hire people, we need to make sure that we hire right and treat them well, and give them some credit. Let's have a nice cafeteria. Let's have a nice restroom. Let's give them some amenities. Let's give them a workout room so that they feel like they're honored because they're critical people. They're coming to work every day. You can't remotely be a warehouse worker. You got to go to work.
One,
well, and Jim,
sorry, Matt,
it's interesting because
go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're good. So Jim, it's interesting because when you think about all this automation and all the things that we're talking about, these tools to help improve these warehouses, the other thing that I know is a topic of discussion is, who can afford all this, right? And so, what are you seeing? I mean, I know that automation is becoming a lot more affordable, and and therefore more accessible to more companies. When you get outside of the Amazons and Targets and Walmarts of the world, how much of what you're describing right now is fitting into the everyday operation of other operators outside of those big global companies?
It's making a good inroad. I'm neither in favor of or against automation. I'm in favor of economics, and so what I want to do is look at the portions of the warehouse where it's best to automate. Um, Typically, it's by labor savings, but sometimes it's about labor safety or the undesirable type of work that we want to offload to automation. But we're finding it easier and easier and easier to justify automation because, yeah, automation is a little more expensive, but labor is a lot more expensive, and labor is very hard to find. And so, if it's cheaper to do it by labor, but you can't hire the people because no one wants the job, well, then by golly, you got no choice but to automate.
With the big change coming in warehouses, and you mentioned higher ceilings are going to likely occur just with racking and the technology that's there. What happens to the existing state or the existing amount of inventory of the buildings that were perhaps built today or built 40 years ago? What happens to those buildings? Are they functionally obsolete? Is there a use case for the buildings? And I guess what I'm trying to get to is if a building from 40 years ago has 24-foot ceilings, and maybe that's even generous, and it doesn't have nearly the same layout and amenities and loading area and everything that goes with it. And then you compare that to a building built today, and then you compare that to what a building could look like in 20 years. What happens to that inventory right now? And I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball, but there's a lot of inventory, some 22 billion square feet worth of industrial real estate in the U.S. What happens to all this inventory?
Well, it's going to have to be torn down and repurposed. It's there's some of it that you can repurpose into other space, but the old thought was, well, we'll just expand the office into the warehouse, and therefore the obsolete warehouse will go away. Well, but we don't need to expand the office anymore because more and more and more people working from home. So the easy out is gone. And so there is going to be a very clear environment where developers and real estate companies will come in and buy your existing building, build a new one for you, and then they're going to come back and tear down that building. And that used to be, something you'd never hear of. But the fact of the matter is the building isn't what you need. Now, if we can repurpose it in some way, that's great. And when we build a new one, let's build it so it has optionality. So it can do this, it can do this, it can do this. There's some options of what we can do with that space. If we're looking at, city planners, there's huge needs for micro warehouses and mini warehouses in highly dense areas. So there's a lot of empty grocery stores too. Well, with those grocery stores, oftentimes have enough juice so we can put some refrigeration in there, and we could make those mini fulfillment centers for local delivery of groceries. Um, so not only is the space that we have obsolete, it's also not configured for what we need. E-commerce order picking requires about 3 times the space and about 4 times the labor if you use the same technology as it did when we did the picking off the shelves of the stores. I mean, let's face it, all of us, when we were younger, we went shopping, we went to the store, and we actually took product off the shelf. We don't do that anymore. Now we just open the front door and the box is sitting on the porch. Well, someone else had to pick that. And so there's a lot more warehousing needed because fulfillment of e-commerce orders takes a lot more labor and space than doing it the way of shipping a whole case to the store. And so what we're going to find is some of that space we can repurpose into fulfillment operations. Some of it's going to have highly desirable locations. Some of it we're going to turn into condominiums, and we've seen some of that going on already across the country. And it's kind of cool to have those old buildings with that beautiful brick and so forth. Before you fix it, it looks like, oh my goodness, what a dump, this old warehouse. But now people are paying premium price for that those old bricks because it's really cool to have that look now. So I think population is going to continue to grow. Living spaces are going to continue to grow, and they're going to demand product to be delivered to them quicker, and therefore we need the warehouses to be more local. So we're going to find purposes for a lot of those buildings, but we're also going to be knocking some down.
So, Jim, one thing that Chad and I have been talking quite a bit about, and it's a topic on everyone's mind, is I know AI is a big topic, but so is EV, right? And the future of how that influences warehousing and not only their location, but where you draw power from. And you've got solar panels going on top of roofs of Prologis, for example, and different things like that. I'm curious to get your thoughts on what that looks like, because one of the things that we got a lot of questions about in Seattle from a lot of developers was basically, what does that future look like? How is the power grid going to support that? You have people talking about automated trucks and how they're going to get charged when they go park at a warehouse, and all these different things that are swirling around with that topic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think some of the EV stuff for over-the-road trucks and so forth is not good economics. The cost of buying those vehicles is prohibitive, and if you can't get them with at least 1,000 or 1,200 miles of battery, it's not going to be effective to use those. So I think that's a little bit of hype that's not there. Obviously, the sustainability issue of using renewable energy and solar and wind and so forth is really critical. I'm seeing warehouse roofs being great spots to put solar. Also seeing warehouse roofs to be a great place to grow vegetables and do farming on tops of the warehouses. And that's working well. We're also finding the vertical farms inside of warehouses. We can build 40-foot tall structures and grow products either in trays on shelves or grow the product vertically. So as we need to look at, quote, feeding the world, and we need to look at the energy consumption in the world, I think sustainability becomes more and more and more and more and more important. And therefore, we have to look at that very carefully. Different parts of the world are looking at different parts of that equation differently. Europe, they're really focused on sustainability. Asia, they're really looking at food upscaling, where you can take the barley and oats that you just made beer with and turn that spent product into fertilizer or into feed for animals. Um, and so lots of innovation going on there. And a lot of that is going to require space. And so we've got space. Let's figure out how to best use it and make us get a return on investment. So I think there's huge needs for us to look at, recycling of product, looking at the total life cycle, looking at the energy, looking at the water consumption, looking at using a space. Is a huge opportunity. It's an obligation for all supply chain people to do that well.
Matt brought up the issue of power, and I'm finding that becoming increasingly more important from a user perspective. Like 10 years ago, a logistics company wouldn't even address power. They would just assume that whatever was brought into the building was sufficient and compatible with what they had planned. But now, with automation, the Internet of Things, and electrification of everything, there's just a lot more demand on the tenant side. So they're now bringing that up. It's much more common for a tenant to say, what's the power into this building? Are you finding that to be an issue that accelerates, or are we going to hit this point of equilibrium where the grid can actually sustainably keep up with the demand, and perhaps it's offset with solar, like Matt brought up on the roofs? And what level do we hit this critical juncture where it either can sustain itself, or we get to the point where it's just up against the limit and we can't add more?
The thing that's interesting is you look back 5 years at the studies that were done, and they show you the demand growing at a certain rate, and then we're going to catch up by this year and so forth. But what's happened is every year the demand has grown more than they anticipated. Now the big thing that's driving the consumption of electricity is all the networks of data centers because of the increased demand due to AI. And so we're sucking a lot of the juice out of our electrical production to drive AI so that we can make more intelligent decisions. And so that whole AI gives you a whole different curve because you need much more data centers, and that's going to use much more energy. So our ability to predict what the future energy requirements are going to be have been terrible. And the government needs to take more responsibility for having a strategic look at that and balancing sustainability and availability. It's really important to have a good environment, but it's also nice to have lights on. I was just in a country not too long ago where they expected 6 hours of outages a day from energy. 6 hours a day. If my energy blips for 4 seconds, I'm going, what the heck? Come in. I got to reconnect. What happened? But it's, can you imagine losing power 6 hours a day? And you don't know what that 6 hours are? You sit down and work, and all of a sudden you've got, I got an hour and 20 minutes on my phone, and I got 2 hours left on my computer. After that, I'm done working for the day. I'm certainly not going to go back and use paper and pencil. I don't even remember how to do that. But, so without a phone, without a computer, you might as well go to the beach.
Yeah.
So where do you see the grid being able to handle this rapidly increasing demand? Do we get to the stage where we do have to have rolling blackouts, or is there a plan in place? And I think I'm giving the government way too much credit here to think that they have a plan in place, but are we at risk of not being able to satiate the demand?
Yeah, there's some places that's showing a tremendous amount of intelligence. There's a bill that just passed the Arizona legislature that said, given you use the right processes, you can use this particular coal to create energy. And although using coal is an evil thing, this particular process with this particular coal does not do evil things, and so we will approve the use of that coal. And therefore, there's going to be a huge new center of data centers in Arizona because they're going to be able to create this because of the new availability of energy. So we're going to need to, I mean, if you look at solar, you look at wind, you look at all the other alternatives, um, it's going to be difficult to replace the traditional amount of energy that we have got from petro, and so it's going to need to view that. And so I think the key is going to be continuous innovation. Every time we get ourselves up to a stop and we're all, everyone's going to die in 4 weeks, well, someone comes up with a new idea and we use that innovation. I think that'll continue, but there's certainly a lack of foresight on the part of governments. I'm not just referring to the U.S., I'm talking around the world about this. And some governments have a total blind eye to sustainability. Some governments have a total blind eye to energy independence. And, my wife asked me when I got home the other night, she said, I've got a half a tank of gas, but the price of gas is going up so quickly. Should I go buy more now, or is it going to keep? I mean, what's going on? It's doubled in the last 4 weeks, and that's the crisis over in Israel and the Hamas issue that's driving those prices up. But it's a crazy world, and our governments have to take responsibility for that. Companies can't solve this problem. It has to be governments.
Well, I know we've gone over a little bit of time here, so we'll wrap up in a minute. I want Matt to maybe think of one good last question to ask, but before you do, I've got one that I'd like to get your insights on, Jim, and that's if power is going to be a problem, availability from a tenant's perspective or the landlord's ability to supply it, perhaps bring it in from the utility provider in the first place. If power is one problem, what other problems are you seeing right now that are at the top of people's lists? And that could be from a tenant's perspective or landlord's perspective, an industry perspective. What are some of the major challenges and problems that you're seeing right now?
Labor and talent. Labor is huge. COVID changed our thinking on work-life balance. And so the concept of taking a full-time job and needing to go to work at the same time every morning and come home at the same time every night isn't family friendly. And so I think that's going to have a major impact. Gig workers are here to stay. Now, if they're independent contractors or not, you can argue on that. But the reality is people want to make money, but they're not willing to sacrifice their family for it. And so labor is an ongoing issue and one that, we need to have to address. Another one is this issue of talent. And so do we have the people with the right education, the right capability that can use these tools? AI and ML are absolutely totally awesome, and they re-engineer the whole landscape. But if you don't have the data scientists and the artificial intelligence expertise to use it, you've got a problem. So our universities need to continue to focus on STEM. We got to produce people that are employable, that have skills, and we need to pound some stakes in the ground there and look at what is the education policy for the nation and how and what are we doing to upgrade that and make it more viable. I think it's education is getting a bad rap now. There's some schools. Matt and I would single Purdue out as a place of having great leadership under the last several presidents, and it's really exciting to see what a school can do when they put their mind to being practical and looking at the true needs of the state and of the country. I'm very involved with bringing higher education to the Dominican Republic, to Panama, to Costa Rica, and there's a lot of cool things going on there. And we need to educate those folks. We need to get that in place. We need to have more STEM people that have the ability to work in science and technology and engineering and mathematics to allow them to be successful. So labor and talent are the two that concern me the most. And then right after that would be water and sustainability.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, Jim, I think for me, you and I touched on this a little bit during one of our discussions, but as we talk about nearshoring to this side of the hemisphere and taking things further and further away from places like China, one of the things that we talked about was we have decades of infrastructure that's been built into how we interact with China, right? Manufacturing of goods and the port system, the warehouses that exist there, et cetera. So you can do the final assembly here on this side of the hemisphere, but what does that look like in terms of the actual manufacturing products and getting the goods to that origin point of when the original manufacturing was taking place in China, and then shipping out from there to the rest of the world. So as we untangle that, what does that look like to you as we talk about bringing things to the Dominican Republic, to Mexico? What do you think the timeline looks like? Do you feel like that's actually fully feasible to do? Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think the challenge we have is a lot of people are still buying products from China, not because of the manufacturing costs, because the manufacturing costs in China are higher than Mexico, and Mexico is higher than the Dominican Republic. Why would you still buy from China then? The answer, because they have the raw materials. China had a national policy to go out and get the critical raw materials and to tie that up. You say of this particular element, there's none in China, but you say China ties it up. How would that happen? Well, it's because in that particular element is found mostly in Australia, and China bought all those Australian mines. So China owns the mines in Australia. So the raw materials coming from there, and therein lies a challenge. So what we need to do is we really need to look at the end-to-end supply chain. You're really not looking at a supply chain if you're looking one down and one up. You need to look all the way back to the raw and all the way up to the consumption, and then the recycle and the life cycle there. And so it's a critical mistake people make is they look at, where's the link before me or the two links before me. You really got to go way back to the raw material, because at the end of the day, everything, every book, every shirt, every cup of coffee, either was something that was grown out of the ground, or something that was mined out of the ground, or something that was taken out of the water. You don't have people fabricating new things that are good for us. I mean, we can make a lot of plastic, but that's bad for us, and it's clogging up the world. So what we need to do is we need to realize that mining and farming are critical elements, and we need to do that close to the point of consumption. And so we need to design for that. So increasing the yield and the productivity further of our farms is really an important issue, because that gives us more raw materials that we can do things with. And then being innovative with those raw materials is really critical. How instead of making a book out of a tree, could we make this out of weeds and harvest wild growing crop and turn that into paper? What types of things can we do to use product that is, quote, spent? Instead of making charcoal briquettes out of charcoal, why don't we take the coffee grounds from Starbucks and turn them into charcoal briquettes? Well, some says, "Oh, I don't want my steak to taste like coffee." It doesn't. It's not the taste of coffee. It's the heat from coffee. And there's an entrepreneur at Purdue that took spent Starbucks coffee grounds and turned them into charcoal briquettes, and it makes a great steak. And so being innovative with the use of our resources and upscaling is really critical. So I think it's a holistic issue, and we got to make sure that when we're doing something that's not friendly to the environment, we're asking questions. Well, how can we do this? How can we do this? How can we do this? And we need to do it in a way that doesn't add excessive cost, because then we become non-competitive and we go out of business. But we got to do it in a way that's responsible. And so I think that's the key. And governments play an important part in that, and the United Nations plays an important part in that. And so we need to support those outreaches and make sure that we're allowing the people that know how to do good things, we allow them to do good things.
Well said on that, Jim. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
So it's somewhat related to the topic, but might be a little bit off tangent, and perhaps I don't even include this section in the final interview. But I want to get your thoughts on why there's so much tension right now between the U.S. and China, and perhaps we're in a cold war with China. Maybe it's an economic war that we're in with China. But from my standpoint as a layman, China has been peaceful for most of their 4,000 plus year existence. They haven't been they haven't engaged in colonialism. They haven't attacked other countries. They've been a relatively peaceful country. They're certainly not trying to invade. I mean, Taiwan is a different story, but they're not trying to take territory away from Mongolia or trying to invade Russia or smaller countries. They're not an aggressive country from a military or tactical standpoint, but there's clearly some economic tension at play there. Why are we having this war, economic or whatever it is? Is this like almost a U.S. government fabricated tension that they're saying we should be at China because of all these economic reasons or espionage or whatever it is? But from my perspective as a layman, I don't see why we should be hostile towards China. So what's driving it? Why is there this inherent tension with a seemingly peaceful country that's not doing anything to us as a nation?
Well, I think I think the way you answer the way you ask the question makes some assumptions which are not accurate. China is not at war, as in physical war, as in Vietnam or as in World War I or World War II, but they're in a much more important war, an economic war. And there's a lot of people in the United States that have been put out of work because of the lack of levelness to the playing field. And so when China subsidizes a company and allows them to sell their product for less than it cost, who that hurts is the workers who lose the job. Mm-hmm. And that's what China has done. When China got admitted into the free trade group, they signed up for all the rules, but they didn't play by the rules. They've been cheating. And so that has resulted in companies making decisions that were not in the political best interest. It's obvious if you go back and look at the evolution of capitalism. Once upon a time, my family would go out to a plot of land, and I'd have one offspring that would do the crops, another offspring that would do the tools, another offspring that would grow the cotton, another offspring that would make the fabric, another offspring that would make the clothing. And everything we needed, we created, because we were the world. We were everything. And someone to feed the cattle, someone to butcher the cattle, and someone to cook, and we all had our specialties. But then what we did is we started looking at the issue of competitive advantage. And the fact of the matter is, I tried to do everything. I wasn't doing anything really well. And so I said, no, I'm just going to do the farming part. And so that leaves Matt to do all the tool part, and allows Chad to have the making materials part. And so we each specialized. And as we specialized, we got better and better at what we do. And so competitive advantage has to do with specialization. One of the things that builds into specialization is the availability of raw material. So if you're close to raw material, you have an advantage over other people. So that's something you should specialize in. And so you can go back and you look, 10,000 years ago, and by looking at the ships that are sunk in the Mediterranean, you can go into a ship that's sunk in the Mediterranean and say, oh, these products are from Greece. These products are from India. These products are from Rome. These products are from Spain. These products are from Egypt. And they had a trade route where the different economies specialized. And so that was taking comparative advantage to its max. What happens then, though, is you have someone that starts cheating. And then what that results in is, although you're producing a better product at a lower cost, you're still going to be tempted to buy this other stuff because the government is subsidizing. And so in one case, the government is taxing, and the other one, they're subsidizing. And now we get a false sense of what is best, and that results in imbalances in labor and labor rates and quality of life and so forth. If you want to run a country that has very low quality of life and bad environment and bad no air conditioning, no clean water, people dying when they're younger because of the health issues related to that, you can do that, and you can use that edge to beat someone else's economy. But you're really at war. It's not a physical war. You're not a shooting war, but it's an economic war. And China has very definitely been very aggressive, and we've been kind of hoodwinked, and we drank the Kool-Aid, and now we're trying to deal with it. And it's not clear that we're doing a lot better at this point either. So it's a real challenge, a real challenge.
Very well said. Yeah, that's I could ask you questions all day. So I could listen to you provide your perspective and your commentary on this all day, because I love everything that you're saying. It's very profound. But in the interest of time, we'll cut it off. Perhaps we could do a part 2 down the road, because I've got probably 30 more questions I could easily ask you. So thank you, Jim. I really do appreciate you taking the time and even going a little bit over to provide your insights on this. We'll provide links to all your books on there as well. I'm going to go check out a couple of them as well. I'm very interested in the recent one you did, as well as some of the ones on supply chain and logistics. So thank you once again. Matt, thanks for co-hosting and setting this up. Any closing words from either of you?
Thank you. Good to see you, Matt and Chad.
Yeah. Thanks again, Jim. And as always, a pleasure, Chad. I appreciate it.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks so much.
Thanks, gentlemen.